question I wanted to ask about where you sort of see the rental market, at least in the next sort of, I know it's a crystal ball question, but 6 or 12 months, where do you sort of foresee that? Do you see any slowing down, or what?
I would like to see when we can start building homes within 6 or 12 month timeframes, I think we'll start seeing a bit of a better improvement in the rental market. Until that, I just can't see how it can get any better. Like, I think it's going to be very, very tight for renters. I feel it's really, really hard for them. And it's I honestly don't see it improving until we can start getting these new estates and these homes being built in a timely fashion. Maybe some more grants, that finance people offer and all of that as well, to try and get people to be able to buy with 5% deposits or whatever it might be. So that would be good. But no, I think it's looking unfortunately for tenants, but it's or for renters, it's looking still very, very strong for investors. I'm seeing a little bit of a shift in borrowing capacity. So I'm finding that yields are still pretty consistent, and the performance of rent opinion versus what people are buying for has been consistent for the last couple of years. I actually feel like it's been pretty solid. I am seeing, as we get a little bit higher in the budget, though, the yields are coming down a little bit there, but it's still pretty strong but consistent, and no different to 6 months ago. But so I was just going to mention that the borrowing capacity I have seen drop a little bit. So if I have had a client with a $450,000 budget, they might now have a $400,000 budget. So that has shifted a little bit, but that's really the only significant change I've seen for my activity with clients I'm dealing with.
What are the types of properties what are the things or characteristics that makes a good property from a rental perspective, and what are some of the properties that you're seeing that are less desirable? And I don't know if that is going to be different for the different sections of Perth as well. What does that look like?
Is the Zoom room important as well? That's something that David Oliver asked.
A Zoom room.
You don't even know what that is. Well, it's because they don't. It's because they don't have floor plans. They don't get creative with in Sydney and everywhere but WA. They have this little, it used to be, studio, because it has a window. It has it doesn't have a window. It's connected. Now it's called Zoom room on the stupid floor plan. So,
really? Oh, I haven't seen that before. So overall, it's really simple. Like, tenants just want, actually I should use renters, because renters is the term I think you guys use over East. Renters just want an easy to live in property. And I don't think we should get too caught up with, air conditioning and things like that, because you can add that in whenever you want. Like, that's just, superficial stuff. That's fine. I think what's really important is having a nice, easy to live in property with an easy flow. If I can walk into the property and go, this is easy to live in, and if I don't have to question how I'm going to live in it, then that's a big tick for me. But the minute a renter goes into a property and goes, how would I fit my couch? Where would I fit my fridge? Would my bed fit in there? Once they start internally asking themselves all these questions, they will start reconsidering whether they want to live in that property. So you really just want to have a property with a nice flow, and something that's maybe there's unrenovated and there's unrenovated, but when it's basic, that's totally fine. People don't mind that. But the flow is definitely important in the layout, and just an easy layout. The exterior being accessed through a living or a meals area is I feel really important, as opposed to it being accessed around the side or through a laundry, that type of thing. That will be something that won't feel natural walking through. Surprisingly, there are so many properties that don't have a fridge recess, and you have to and you wouldn't think of looking at it, but you'd have to put your fridge in the meals area. So that is a little bit of a negative that someone would question. The bedrooms being too small, or more importantly, that main bedroom. But you know what? Built-in robes, you can add a built-in robe if you need to. So I wouldn't get too caught up on those things that you can fix. I'm more worried about the things that you can't fix or that would be expensive for you to.
Hard to fix a fridge recess. I mean, that's insane. Like, people don't have. How did people not have this? I mean, I suppose you could just put it somewhere, but anyway.
Yeah, like I looked at one. I mean, there's been lots of them that don't have it, but there was one where the fridge had to be placed in like on the side, and that means that it cut off the cupboards because it was like a sort of a gully type kitchen, and then the fridge would cut off part of the access to some of the cabinetry. And sure, you could fix it, but you'd also have to cut away some of your kitchen space. Yeah, it's surprising at how often that actually comes up.
There you go.
I like to look inside cabinetry, inside the kitchen cupboards and the bathroom cupboards where we can find that there's water damage. That's an issue because it means that you have to replace the whole carcass. So we're seeing a bit of that. But, at the end of the day, everything else is pretty superficial. In terms of 3-bedroom, 1 bathrooms, 4-bedroom, 2 bathrooms, I think there's always going to be a need for both. I think there's definitely always going to be a need for affordable housing. So when you're looking at a 3-bedroom, 1 bathroom, if the property can have a second living area, that would be ideal. So that would mean having a front formal living and then maybe an open plan kitchen, mealsy family area. That would be better in a 3x1 as opposed to a 3x1 with just 1 living area. So I'm finding that is sometimes the thing. And a patio is always really nice. In WA, we love having a patio where you can sit under. And again, a lot of properties don't have patios. So they're my main focus points that I'm looking at when I'm looking through a property.
Are there things that you look at that are like, oh gosh, we can't, we're not buying this one. This one's not worthwhile. Like, are there any like big red flags that we should look at when we're looking at property?
Oh, they're pretty obvious. Like this one that I looked at where, to be honest, I was really disappointed that the sales agent would have even listed the property. I thought it was not suitable to be sold to anyone. This is the worst property I've ever looked at, and it was a couple of months ago. I walked through the property, and I'm not kidding you, this property had 9 broken windows. The windows were boarded up. It had graffiti on the exterior wall of the garage. The tenant bailed me up in the bathroom so that the agent couldn't hear her tell me that there had been a previous gas leak at the property, and the owner has had the gas cut off to the property, and that's why she's using a gas camper kitchen in her kitchen. She didn't even have an oven. Like, it's obvious. These red flags are obvious. And so those properties are not suitable for investors. They're suitable for young first home buyers that can do it themselves and spend time and
sweat equity on it.
Yeah, correct. When they're doing it themselves, painting it themselves and doing the actual physical work, they could get it for a bargain. It's not for an investor. It'd be too long to renovate it. So those ones are the red flags. I like to, the last property that I was probably a little bit unsure about was where it carries a couple of the factors. So the way that I work is that if I look at a property and I say to you, the property's fantastic, easy to live in, you don't need to spend anything, it's ready to go, I can't see anything that someone's going to question in it, then for me, category 1 is, you might be a bit more generous with your offer for that property because it's a good one. Category 2 is really where there's a couple of concerns. So if I look at a property and it's about the volume of these red flags, as opposed to just having one red flag, because if a tenant goes into a property and the bedroom's a bit small, now on its own, if that was the only red flag of the property and everything else was perfect, it actually probably wouldn't be that much of an issue. But if there's a small main bedroom and there's no fridge recess and the toilet is in the bathroom and you can't access it, now we've got a couple of things. So it's more the volume of red flags that's the issue, as opposed to having a property with one red flag that a tenant would go, you know what, I will just live with that because everything else is good. So for me, it's the volume as opposed to the actual red flag.
He says, in your opinion, what are the key factors to look at when we're buying in Perth? We know some states it's important to look out for things like being close to public transport, not too far away from the CBD, close to schools, hospitals. However, it sounds like that may not be the case in Perth. Sydney side of here. Because there are some very, very affordable suburbs in the northern pocket of Perth, and there are cheaper places like more expensive places like 20 kilometers away from those, and they're like 5 kilometers away from the city, 10 kilometers away from the city. So it doesn't really match the Sydney and Melbourne frame.
Yeah, it's so schools is definitely a big one, and being close to schools, I think, is definitely a factor that should be considered. I don't think it's a deal breaker though, but I just definitely think it should be considered. But it depends on the area, because if we go too far south, and if you're near a shopping centre or near a train line, you don't want to be near the train line or the shopping centre in some suburbs, because you can get loitering. But going north and northern suburbs, the train line is very well connected with professional workers working in the city. So the train line north of the river, for example, is really convenient for people going into work, because we are finding we're getting more of a white collar worker in the northern suburbs. So they use the train system really well. But, and I'm very stereotypical. This isn't saying that every single person is white collar, they're not. But going south, then we find that people don't generally use the train system as much, because we are less likely to get a lot of white collar workers. So it would be considered a bit average to be too close to a train line in some of these southern suburbs, because you are just going to get loiterers, and young children. So schools definitely, of course, if there's a nice shop that's going, a nice sort of shopping centre like a Westfield, that would be considered good. But I don't, from a rental point of view, I don't feel like that's something that tenants would say, I want to be near a shop. But they definitely would say, I want to be close to this school, or I want to be in this school zone. That definitely does come up as more important, and less likely for people to say, I want to be near a train line because I work in the city. Those conversations are not things that come up from a tenancy point of view, I'm finding.
What are some of the main ones that come up for you?
The parking is probably the boring stuff. It's the parking, it's the dishwasher. It's really just a simple I mean, ideally they don't want tandem parking, they want side by side. And sheds actually is probably a big one as well. Sheds, like, you can imagine a husband or a guy going, just go find a property as long as it's got a shed attitude, Yeah.
And what about proximity to the beach?
And beach, yes. I was going to say that beach is actually a really good one as well, and that's definitely something that people would preference. And while it's not necessarily a priority in a changing market, if we've got a lot of stock available and your property is the one that's closest to the beach, it will be important.
Do you have any tips on? You have any tips on, I suppose, if you're buying investment property, like getting project managing a reno? Do you have any tips on how to make that most efficient?
Yeah, I mean, I think that consideration should be taken into how you're renovating. So I like to say to clients that if you are going to replace like for like, that's not necessarily going to add value. If the property needs a paint, that $8,000 you're spending is not adding value to the property. It's maintaining. There's a vast difference between maintaining a property and renovating it for extra cash flow. So, for example, painting's painting, so that's fine. But you might want to consider, if you were to replace vertical blinds with vertical blinds, sure, that might, let's just for argument's sake, say it's going to cost $1,500. Well, that's fine, but maybe for an extra $700, you could actually get the roller blinds. And therefore, we are now upgrading the style, and the home's becoming a little bit more modern. So have a look and see whether you can just go a little bit more than like for like, so that we can start adding that value. Same with flooring. Sure, you can go through and you could recarpet the property, but if you're just recarpeting, some old carpet, it might not have any value from a rental point of view. But vinyl planks will last you. They're going to be more expensive, but they're going to last you 30 years. You will not have to replace them again. It's done. And so just spending that little bit extra to do it properly, I can tell you that is going to give you extra value from a rent return than spending it like I said, like for like. And that's going into what tenants want. Tenants do prefer no carpet as well. Carpet in the bedrooms, but living areas, they really do like seeing that to be more vinyl planks. So that would be my tip when it comes to renovating. Just be mindful, or maybe just ask, get 2 quotes. So when the carpet person goes out there, get a quote for carpet and vinyl planks. When the blind guy goes out there for the windows, get a quote for verticals and rollers. And another thing that we've just been doing, which is so good, and I think it only cost about $1,500, is we've been getting kitchens repainted, like the bench tops and the doors, really super effective, and it looks brand new. So good. So there's definitely
change the handles.
Yeah, totally.
Those little bits and bobs make such a massive difference.
Can I just add on one more thing to that as well, is that sometimes if you are not sure, a really great way to approach a property manager is to say, listen, I've got a budget of $5,000 or I've got a budget of $10,000. How do you think it's best for me to spend that to get maximum rent return? And let the property manager give you a bit of help, because you might want to spend money on something that's not going to have any effect. But the property manager might say, listen, I would probably prioritize this, then this, then this. So let's have a look at those quotes, and that's how we're going to do a bit of a plan for you. But giving that property manager the budget to say, how would I be best to spend this amount of money?
Hot spots and the not spots of Perth. What are we talking about here, Ash?
Okay, so I am going to tell you the trending suburbs. So these are just the suburbs that I'm finding everyone calls me about. So I haven't, disclosure, I haven't done any data analytics. I'm not recommending them from that point of view. I'm just telling you this is where everyone calls me for. Very distinctive. So in that 300 to 400,000 category, we are seeing Camillo, Gosnells, Seville Grove, and Parmelia. Particularly those ones are very popular at the moment. And we are typically seeing purchases, for example, if they're around 350,000 as a purchase price, we are probably seeing a rent return of anywhere from $380 a week to $420 per week. That's the return that we would be wanting to see there. There are always going to be some fantastic case studies. I've got one where the client purchased for $300,000 and it rented out for $400 per week. So there's definitely some really cool ones. Another client purchased for $380,000 and it rented out for $500 per week. There are always going to be good ones, but I try to be sensible as well and just talk about the majority, what we're seeing in terms of a return. These suburbs are really good, but what we've got to be mindful of is the affordability in that area. So the affordability for tenants in those areas really they really just want to be paying a rent anywhere between $350 and maybe $430 per week. So we want to make sure that we are sort of meeting that demand because the ideal tenant can't really afford any more than that. They might pay it in a market like now, but we will quickly see rental distress if it goes on too long. So I think people need to be mindful of that we could get to a situation where we're at a peak. We're not at a peak there at the moment, but where there's a peak in the rent return. So that's those suburbs. In terms of I'm going to break it down to that 400 to maybe under 500, maybe I want to say more 400 to 450 per week price range. I've recently seen a bit more activity happening in Lockridge. So Lockridge is eastern suburbs, and client just purchased there last week. I think it was around 420,000, and we've suggested possibly a rent around 550 per week, which is high.
Wow.
And that's because if you look in Lockridge, there's no stock available. So that one's going to be really exciting as a case study to see how that performs. And we definitely still seeing activity in the Rockingham area. So all those suburbs down there, that was where everyone started purchasing a couple of years ago, the Rockingham area. But I just would say to be mindful there that we don't go overspending too much in that suburb, because again, we don't want to see any rental de-stress. Families there have an affordability of around $450 to $500 per week. So if you can find a property that complements that sort of rental return, I think that would be a really great sort of price point to be at. And just be mindful that if you buy a property that needs to be rented out for $600, for example, a week, that there's not going to be as many people in that vicinity able to pay that. So being mindful.
Such a great point. Yeah, such a great point.
I sort of see, being an investor as a business. If you're an investor, you are buying, and you're a business, you are buying a product, you're buying an investment property, and you need to know who that ideal tenant is that's going to be renting that property, who you're marketing to. So you need to know who that ideal tenant is so that you can buy a property appropriate for the majority of that market. And that's the way I try to approach whether you buy a 3x1, a 4x2, how much you spend, etc. So they're sort of the suburbs for that 300 to 400 and that 400 to 450 per week mark. In that 400 to 450 per week mark,
can I ask you a question? In the Rockingham area, what's the story? Because I've noticed a little bit of, I wouldn't say arbitrage, but yeah, it hasn't quite sort of caught up as much yet. Hillman, what do you think about? I mean, I'm seeing your expression, so maybe that tells me all I need to know. What do you think about that sort of?
Hillman comes up every now and then, and it's funny because I think people want to buy there, they just never end up buying there. There's not a lot available in terms of shops. If you want to shop, you need to sort of go outside that suburb. But the general consensus is very long-term tenants in that area, and they do stay put. A lot of retirees actually are there, so not a bad option. And it definitely is coming up from time to time again. But I think when people go to actually buy something, they don't end up buying there, but they do look at it as a suburb of interest.
It's also very small. So the stock, like this is actually, I think it's one of the smallest suburbs. I don't want to say in WA, but I know it's definitely, I reckon it's the smallest in Rockingham as far as I know. This is it. It's got, one ring road around it and then offshoots and one through the middle. So it's not a massive, suburb.
For someone that's lived in Perth all her life, I didn't even know Hillman was a suburb until probably about 18 months ago. So
that's fair enough.
But yeah, not bad. But yeah, I'm just not finding anyone's eventuated. It's not being flooded. It's just been touched on a little bit. So yeah,
things sell very quickly, but they're also, and you may touch on this, but Mandurah. Do you think is Mandurah too far from the city, because it seems a good distance?
Well, first of all, we pronounce it Mandurah, and
Mandurah.
It is. So Mandurah, obviously there's beautiful parts of Mandurah and not so beautiful parts. But I feel like it's a seasonal area. So we've definitely got the canals, some beautiful areas. To describe it to the Eastern State people, it's an area that if I wanted to take my kids for a weekend away, I would go stay in a hotel in Mandurah for a couple of nights. It can be seasonal like that. So, but Greenfields in Mandurah is not, necessarily maybe one of the best suburbs there, but it's there is definitely investor activity, and investors are purchasing around 380,000 and renting out for about 430 to 450. So they're 430 to 450 per week. So in terms of the performance, it's not too bad, but definitely quality of tenant. To give you an idea for quality of tenants, I would find that in an area that was really had a good quality tenant attraction, we could do one home open and have 80% of applications come through with great references. But some of these areas down there, what we're seeing is we need to actually do a couple of home opens to really expose the property to a big volume of clients, because we're finding that quite often we can get 80% of applications that are crap. So it's definitely being very careful with tenant selection and making sure there's some tenants, but you just have to go through a few to find them as well.
Where are some of the not spots? Where are some of the places? And I don't think we really spoke too much about this, and we don't want to disparage any places, but
where should somebody be cautious, Joe? Let's say cautious.
Yeah, well, yeah. That's good. Yeah, that's a better way to put it.
I think with high risk comes high reward, and I think that this suburb that I'm going to mention, I don't think it's for everyone. So, for example, I'm going to use the town of Kwinana as an example. Parmelia, Aurelia, Medina. The reason why I think you should be wary of it, if you are someone, if you're an investor who is needing just a tack-on property to their portfolio, don't want a headache, just need to add another one on, you probably don't want to go there, only because when I say risk, I'm referring to the tenancy risk. We have seen a higher volume of tenancy concerns in this area. So I'm very careful.
It's super interesting because this is where interstate investors get in trouble. And I think this is why, like, I value kind of getting boots on the ground, because you've got some areas here, Waikiki, Safety Bay, Rockingham, that are doing really, really well that you're talking about. And then Kwinana, Medina later. These places are just that little bit more affordable. So it's an easy, like, just mentally, oh, well, I'll just, look, it's gone up to 450. Oh, I'm going to go over to here and buy. But bit of a mistake, is it?
So, I mean, it's super affordable, and it's definitely, that's why people are still attracted to it. And we manage properties there. We've got properties there, and our tenants, they're actually great. We've been super duper careful with tenancy selection, and we've been very, very patient with tenant selection. So it's not necessarily saying don't buy there, but just be mindful that you're going to have to be a little bit more patient when it comes to finding a tenant. And we are going to be a bit more, we're going to scrutinize an application a little bit more for that area just to protect you. But in terms of affordability, it's amazing. I'm from an experience point of view, when I've had large insurance claims, they've actually come out of that suburb, from defaulting tenants. And the defaulting tenant one that I'm thinking that I had was actually not a bad tenant selection. She was in the property for 3 years, no problem at all, perfect tenant. It was where a change of circumstance happened in her life that she that things went downhill and we had a problem with it. So I don't believe that the school system's very strong there, and I feel that is one of the biggest contributions to me not holding up that area in high regard, because of the school system. I don't feel is as good as other areas maybe. So while it might not be a place for investors who are very seasoned investors, just want the add-on, I'd probably say those people aren't going to want to be bothered with this suburb. But where a client might want to actually buy there is someone who's actually maybe a bit more younger, and someone who actually goes, you know what, I'll have landlord insurance. I don't actually mind if, every 4 or 5 tenants I have a bit of a hiccup. Or a client that goes, I just need to get in the market and that's all I can afford. Or a client that says, I have grand plans, I want to buy 5 properties in 5 years. They might be willing to take the risk for these suburbs as well, because they're buying so low, the potential could be pretty strong there as well. So the rent returns are strong in the area. My only concern is really being careful and not rushing the tenancy selection process, and being mindful that the school system, I don't think is great. However, if you were to drive through the suburb, I actually think and people might disagree, it's actually a very pretty suburb. It's got beautiful nature, bushland, etc. It's just that's the concern, and I feel a bit mean, because if there's people that purchase it, but it's just about being careful, isn't it? But high risk, high reward, so it might pay off for people.